Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I hardly slept for 6 months. Not because I was insomniac, but because the idea wouldn't leave me alone. Quantum Link kept me on edge like a newborn baby. Irregular working hours, exhausting fatigue, but a strange, crazy love that made it all worthwhile. Every day, I devoted myself to the project, convinced that if I made it perfect, they would finally notice me. I still remember the night it all started. It was almost midnight, the lights in the office had long since gone out, and the only source of light was my desk lamp. I had stayed behind after another failed sync with David, my boss, who had rushed through the meeting, nodding half-heartedly and vaguely saying, "Keep me posted." He hadn't written a single word in the project brief. I barely glanced at my prototype, but I still wanted to impress him. I still foolishly believed that his approval meant something. Quantum Link wasn't just a product. It was a platform that could change the way corporate systems interacted. Secure, adaptive, with real-time self-healing capabilities. It could save companies millions. It could set our firm apart from the rest. But its creation felt like a cry in the wilderness. I lost code over the holidays. I missed birthdays. I ate lukewarm ramen from my desk drawer and went to meetings in a hoodie because my laundry was always 3 days late. And every time I submitted a progress report, David would smile that indifferent smile and say something like, "Looks good. Just make sure everything's ready for the client." He never stayed late, never offered to help, never asked what I needed, but I still believed that the work spoke for itself. I thought if I could just show this to the partners, they would understand what I had created. They would see me. I didn't lose hope until the evening when I sent David the final version of the presentation. The real version. The one I had worked so hard on. 43 slides with accurate data, architectural diagrams, predictive models, and comparative metrics showing a 68% increase in data flow efficiency across all systems. I spent 2 weeks developing the presentation, and when I clicked send, I actually smiled. I thought I had done it. I thought this was the moment I would finally step out of the shadows. But I didn't hear from David for 2 days, then 3. And when he finally replied, it was just one sentence. "Looks good. I'll take it." I told myself he just meant he would schedule a meeting. I convinced myself that he would introduce me, or at least mention me during the presentation. But deep down, I knew. And yet, I said nothing. Because we were taught to believe that if we worked hard enough, kept our heads down, and did our jobs, sooner or later someone would notice us. The morning of the presentation, I woke up before my alarm. Not with excitement, more like that jittery, untethered feeling you get before a storm rolls in. I told myself it was just nerves. Of course I was anxious. This was the biggest day of my career. I'd picked out my outfit the night before, a sleek navy blazer, clean lines, just enough structure to feel like armor. My shoes were low-heeled but sharp. I wanted to be taken seriously, to look like I belonged in that boardroom. I even skipped my usual coffee run, too afraid my hands would shake. At 7:42 a.m., I stood in front of the mirror, practicing how I'd introduce the project. "Good morning, and thank you for your time today." I said it 6 times, tweaking my posture, my tone. By the 7th, I sounded polished, calm. The mask was ready. When I arrived at the office, the place was already buzzing. Assistants fluttered between rooms, and someone was wheeling in a fresh tray of pastries like this was just another Wednesday. Except, something felt off. No one greeted me. Usually, Maria at the front desk smiled or waved, but this time she barely looked up from her screen. My stomach tightened, but I smiled anyway and walked through security like I belonged, because I did. I stepped into our floor's common area and spotted 2 partners chatting near the espresso machine. They were laughing, relaxed. I caught snippets of something about David's pitch and how slick the new deck looked. I paused. David's pitch? No, I told myself. That's just how they talk. He's leading the intro, maybe. I'm still presenting. I've earned this. Don't let paranoia get in your head now. I checked my phone. No new messages. The meeting was still on the calendar for 9 a.m. Conference Room B. My name was still on the invite, wasn't it? I reopened the calendar to double-check, and I hesitated. The invite didn't list any presenters, just the subject, Quantum Link, Partner Presentation, That was weird. I had included my name in the original invite when I sent the project summary. Maybe David revised it? Maybe he just forgot to add it back? I shook my head, willing myself not to spiral. I was being ridiculous. David had said this was a team win. He told me to be there. He said we'd tag team the Kanda. Still, as I walked past the glass conference room and saw the materials already set on the table, each folder branded with our firm's logo and the new, sleeker QuantumLink typeface I'd created, I felt that twist in my gut again. Something wasn't right. I hovered near the door, waiting for someone to call me in, waiting for someone to say, "Hey, there she is, ready to knock their socks off?" But no one did. I was still standing outside the conference room, heart pounding like it was trying to warn me of something my mind refused to believe, when my phone buzzed, a single message. From David, 8:59 a.m., David R. Sinclair. "You are not needed in this room." That was it. No punctuation, no explanation. 7 words that unraveled 6 months of work and a career's worth of loyalty in an instant. I stared at the screen, blinked, read it again. I actually thought it might be a mistake. It wasn't. Inside, the glass wall offered a clear, cruel view. David was already speaking, already gesturing to the first slide of the deck I had built from scratch. The room was full, partners, investors, a few senior execs flown in just for this pitch. They were leaning forward, listening. And there he stood, confidently presenting QuantumLink as if it had always belonged to him. My name was gone. In its place, on the title slide, was his. QuantumLink, a strategic framework by David R. Sinclair. He didn't just cut me out. He replaced me. I felt my breath catch, like I'd been kicked in the chest. I watched as he flipped to the architectural diagrams I'd drawn at 2 a.m. on my 3rd cup of coffee. As he explained the adaptive load balancing model I'd refined until it could predict system shifts 3 hours ahead. As he pointed to the deployment map that took me 3 weeks of testing to stabilize. And every time he said, "my team," or "I developed," I felt a little piece of me cave in. He was stealing everything, not just the work, not just the credit. He was stealing the narrative, and no one in that room knew. No one saw me standing outside the glass wall, watching the betrayal unfold in real time like a silent, one-woman ghost story. My phone slipped back into my pocket, fingers trembling. I had given him everything. Updates, notes, full visibility into the project. I trusted him with the draft presentation. I assumed we were aligned. I thought he wanted us to win, but he wanted to win alone. For a long moment, I stood there frozen, half breathing, half believing. Then, slowly, I turned away. My body moved toward the elevator almost by instinct. I didn't know if I was walking away or just collapsing inward, trying to outrun the humiliation, the shock, the stupid, aching hope that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But I stopped, just before the elevator doors opened, because sometimes your heart breaks just enough to wake something else up. And suddenly, I wasn't walking away anymore. I was turning around. I didn't go to the elevator. I stood just outside the glass, back pressed against the cool wall, staring into the room like it was some parallel reality. A version of my life where I didn't exist. David was mid-sentence, flipping to the analytics dashboard I had stayed up 3 nights in a row to fine-tune. The partners leaned in. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive-looking watch, whispered something to the woman beside him. She smiled, nodded, and then I heard it. "Brilliant structure," she murmured, just loud enough that the sound filtered through the glass. "Sinclair's a genius." I didn't realize I had stepped forward until I caught my reflection, faint and ghost-like, layered over the images on the presentation screen. Another colleague walked past me, Marla, from data science. She paused when she saw me. "Oh, hey," she said, clearly thrown. "Aren't you supposed to be in there?" I opened my mouth, closed it, shrugged. She gave me a hesitant smile. "Weird. Anyway, looks like David really nailed it. The board's eating it up." I couldn't respond. I couldn't even blink. David clicked to the performance forecast slide, the one I had manually built in Excel after the modeling software kept crashing. He didn't even stumble over the numbers. Probably because I'd annotated everything like an idiot, making it easy for him to just read and perform. They laughed at one of his analogies, applauded his foresight. And every word he said, every gesture, every confident glance, it all came from my bones, my burnout, my sacrifice, my silence. I was still standing there, fists clenched at my sides, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. 2 men in security uniforms stood beside me, polite, calm, professional. "Hi," the taller one said gently. "Are you Miss Bennett?" I nodded slowly. "I'm really sorry," he continued, eyes flicking to his partner. "But we were asked to escort you off the premises." I blinked. "What?" The shorter one spoke next. "Your manager, Mr. Sinclair, has given us notice. He said you're not authorized to be on this floor during the presentation." I stared at them. "This is my project," I said, the words coming out sharper than I expected. The taller one looked uncomfortable. "We understand, ma'am, but we're just following instructions." Behind me, the muffled sound of laughter rang out from the boardroom. I turned my head, just enough to glimpse David shaking hands with one of the investors, that damn smile still plastered on his face. My jaw tightened. "So," I said, my voice low now, trembling, but not with fear, with something colder, something stronger. "You're asking me to leave?" They nodded gently. "Please." And I stood there, not moving, not yet. I stood still, my back pressed to the glass wall. The 2 security guards beside me were still waiting, watching me with awkward sympathy, unsure whether to push or just wait for me to process what was happening. But I couldn't move. Not yet. My eyes were fixed on the boardroom, my breath slow, controlled, shallow. Inside, David was coasting through the final slides of my presentation. Every chart, every metric, every forecast I had spent sleepless weeks refining flashed behind him as he talked like he'd dreamt them up over brunch. "And with Quantum Link's adaptive nodes and scalable architecture," he said, his voice like velvet, "we're looking at a minimum 62% efficiency gain across Tier 1 operations. That's not just optimization, that's evolution." There was a polite ripple of applause. I felt physically ill. He was wrapping up now, pacing casually in front of the long table like a man completely at ease. He had even unbuttoned his suit jacket. I recognized the move. It was a tactic. The signal of relaxed dominance, the faux humility of someone who believed they already had the room. "And so," he said, his hands spread in a practiced gesture, "we open the floor to questions. I'm happy to walk you through the details." And that's when it happened. A pause. A voice. Clear. Measured. "David," said one of the partners, a sharp-looking man with close-cropped silver hair and an air of precise authority. I recognized him. Jonathan Randall, Senior Strategy Director, known for being polite but surgical in his feedback. "Can you walk us through the recursive load recalibration logic again?" David stopped mid-step. Randall's tone remained pleasant, but there was a thread of steel beneath it. "Specifically," he continued, "I'm interested in how Quantum Link prevents cyclical latency buildup in its decentralized architecture. That's been a major flaw in most real-time load distribution systems. You seem to have addressed it elegantly. Can you elaborate?" The room went still. David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the desperate search for keywords, the scan of memory for anything I might have said in one of our dozens of debriefs that could save him now. "Well," he began, his voice slower now, less confident. "What we did, what I designed, was a system that prioritizes, load clusters based on timing thresholds to avoid conflict." Even from where I stood, I could see Randall's eyebrows lift a fraction. David rushed on. "So instead of allowing direct node-to-node reassignment, we created an intermediary arbitration layer that, filters recalibration logic through a central protocol, thereby avoiding direct recursion." "Interesting," Randall said mildly. "And how do you prevent the central protocol from becoming a bottleneck under peak demand?" David blinked. His smile twitched, just slightly. "It's asynchronous, so it doesn't backload." Someone coughed, not politely. Inside, posture began to shift. People leaned back instead of forward. Frowns replaced nods. A woman near the end of the table, Director Singh, if I remembered correctly, crossed her arms, her expression turning skeptical. David's hands were now clasped too tightly in front of him. He shifted his weight. "Of course, I can provide full documentation post-meeting," he said quickly. "The internal architecture is robust. We've validated every element." And then Randall delivered the final cut. "You brought documentation with you, didn't you?" he asked, tone still neutral but cutting. "System diagrams, code maps, something we can review now?" David's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to the stack of printed decks on the table. Those decks were visuals only. The actual logic maps were on a separate drive, my drive. The drive David never asked for, because he never thought he'd need to explain anything. He hesitated. "The full documentation isn't in today's deck. I wanted to keep things high level for clarity." Randall's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's a $50 million proposal. Clarity should include infrastructure transparency." I felt my breath catch. This was it. The mask was slipping. David's smile faltered. One of the other partners, a quiet but influential woman named Eleanor Tate, leaned forward and asked, "And this arbitration layer, what is it built in?" David swallowed. "It's a modular protocol using Python-based scaffolding, interfacing with, low-level C routines for efficiency." I almost laughed, out loud. The arbitration layer was entirely written in Rust. We'd chosen it because of the performance trade-offs, because Python couldn't handle concurrent threading at the scale we needed. He didn't even know what the damn thing was built in. I stepped forward, just one step. The guards glanced at me, eyes widening slightly. "Miss..." one of them began, reaching out. I held up my hand, silencing him. My eyes never left the glass. Inside, the silence was growing heavier by the second. They didn't know it yet, not fully, but something was wrong. Very wrong. David was unraveling, and every second he spoke, every breath he took in that room, brought him closer to exposure. The silence stretched in the boardroom, thick and damning. David tried to recover. He fumbled for a pen, scribbled something on his notes, probably hoping to buy time, or at least look busy. But the damage was already done. Randall leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I'm going to be honest, David," he said, his voice calm but edged. "You're asking for a significant investment. $50 million is not a handshake deal. If you can't walk us through the architecture on the spot, if you don't understand the very system you're presenting, then we need to reassess." David opened his mouth to protest, but Randall cut him off with a raised hand. "Have everything ready for the next meeting," he said firmly. "Every document, every thread of logic, every line of code that supports the infrastructure. Otherwise, we won't just be questioning the project. We'll be questioning your leadership." That landed like a hammer. Eleanor Tate spoke next, her tone clipped. "And make sure the original technical lead is involved. Whoever actually designed the recalibration model, we want them in the room." David's face twitched. Of course. Yes. I'll have the full team involved next time." Someone else snorted under their breath. A low, unimpressed sound. The moment was over. The pitch had been derailed, the magic broken. What started as a coronation had ended in suspicion. And I knew right then, David's castle was cracking. I turned from the glass. The guards followed as I walked, but they didn't stop me. Maybe they sensed something had shifted. Maybe they were just relieved I hadn't caused a scene. But no one said a word as I exited the conference floor, rode the elevator in silence, and stepped out into the sharp spring sunlight. The air outside felt different. Real. People passed me on the sidewalk, rushing to meetings, sipping coffees, answering calls. None of them knew that everything in my world had just imploded, and yet maybe also ignited, because something else had shifted, not just in that boardroom, but in me. David thought he had buried me, silenced me with a text and stolen credit, but all he did was open a door I didn't even know I needed to walk through. I crossed the street and kept walking. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't look back. Instead, I opened my notes app and started typing. Not out of spite, out of strategy. Plan A, immediate documentation, backup full development logs, Reformat original code architecture. Timestamp commits from GitHub. Repo. Retrieve original emails with David discussing project roles. Plan B. Ownership trail. Locate IP registration documents. Confirm timestamps on original architecture white papers. Draft public summary under own name, if necessary. Plan C. Leverage. Reach out to Lucille from legal, still owes me a favor. Identify partner allies. Randall, Tate. Time next move with their follow-up meeting. This wasn't over, not even close. I wasn't going to fight dirty. I didn't need to. I had the truth. And it was finally my turn to make sure the right person told the story. By the time I got home, I already had a plan. Not just a vague idea or a list of half-formed thoughts. I had structure, purpose, fire. My apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fan and the distant city noise beyond the window. But inside me? A storm was brewing, a focused, methodical one. I powered on my workstation. The same rig I'd used to build QuantumLink. Long nights, forgotten dinners, 2 a.m. breakthroughs coded between sips of cold coffee. Everything I needed was still here, exactly where I'd left it. External backups, versioned builds, an encrypted drive of original architectural diagrams, benchmarks, test scenarios, and annotated source code. Everything with my name on it, dated, documented. I didn't just collect the data, I fortified it. I zipped the entire project into a series of layered archives, password protected, buried under decoy folders and labeled like innocuous coursework from college, behavioral econ notes, thesis research, photos, Paris trip 2017. And then I wrote the summary, a 3-page technical brief, clean, professional. It outlined the full vision of QuantumLink, from concept to execution. Not in the vague marketing speak David had used, but in crisp technical terms that only someone who built it could articulate. It ended with my name. My real name. Emery L. Bennett. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. The room was dark now, lit only by the screen glow and the city lights outside. But I felt awake. Alive in a way I hadn't in months. And that's when my phone buzzed. David R. Sinclair. Missed call. 1. A minute later, a text. David. Hey, can we talk? Something came up after the meeting. Call me when you can. I stared at it for a second, deleted it. Then came another. David. We're going to need the latest documentation for next week. Just send me what you have so we can prep. I didn't respond. 10 minutes passed. David. Emery, I don't know what's going on, but we need to get aligned. Don't make this difficult. You're still part of the team. Still part of the team. That line almost made me laugh. The same team that locked me out, erased my name, and tried to walk off with 6 months of work like it was a free buffet? Another call. I let it ring. Another message. David. This isn't a good look for you. You're putting your future at risk over a misunderstanding. Ah, there it was. The shift. From charm to control. From persuasion to pressure. He was scrambling now, because he finally realized something. The future of QuantumLink, the real future, wasn't in that boardroom. It was sitting right here, in my apartment, on my laptop, in my hands. And for the first time since this began, I was the one holding the leverage. By morning, David had completely dropped the pretense. Gone were the friendly texts, the harmless requests. The tone had changed, sharpened, like a knife drawn slowly across glass. David. Still haven't received the files. This is becoming a problem. David. You know what's at stake here. We've promised delivery. The partners expect documentation. Then came the real message. David. If you're thinking of playing games, I suggest you rethink that strategy. This isn't personal, but if I don't have those files by end of day, I'll have no choice but to escalate, including reviewing your role in the project and your future with the firm. There it was. Not a threat, a promise. He was telling me, in the most polished corporate language possible, that if I didn't hand over the work, he'd not only fire me, he'd bury me, burn my credibility, smear me as unstable, difficult, vindictive. I could already hear it. She misunderstood her role. She was never officially the technical lead. We had to make tough calls for the good of the company, They wouldn't come at me directly. They'd do it the way corporate snakes always do, with plausible deniability and polite little knives. But I was done being polite. I stared at the last message, heat rising in my chest, my pulse steady, my fingers cold. He thought I'd panic, that I'd fold, that I'd fear losing everything. What he didn't understand was, I already had. He took my voice, my moment, my chance to finally be seen. That was the loss, the humiliation. But I wasn't going to let them treat me like a fool. So I made a decision. I opened the dummy folder I'd created the night before, the one with generic documentation, cobbled together from outdated drafts and safe, sanitized charts, all technically correct, all strategically useless, a perfectly polished pile of nothing, no real architecture logic, no code base, no insight into the adaptive model. It was just enough to look real to someone who hadn't built it. I compiled the decoy, packaged it with care, added a cover letter that looked sincere. To David R. Sinclair. Subject, Quantum Link Tech Packet, requested. Attached is the complete documentation as discussed. Let me know if you need anything further. Emery. I hovered over the send button for a second, then clicked. It was done. Within 3 minutes, my phone buzzed again. David. Got it. Appreciate you coming through. I smiled. He had no idea. And the best part? The clock was now ticking on his credibility. Because the second he tried to explain that decoy documentation in the next meeting, the second they asked him to defend it, he'd implode, and I'd be ready. The second presentation was set for Friday morning. David walked in with false confidence draped across his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. From a distance, he still looked the part. Pressed suit, charming half-smile, a leather folder tucked under his arm. But there was something off in his walk. In the way his eyes darted a little too often toward the doorway, he was expecting resistance. Just not the kind that was coming. The partners were already seated when I arrived. This time, I didn't stand outside. I walked straight in, uninvited, unannounced. And I took a seat at the back of the room like I belonged there, because I did. David's eyes flicked to me and froze, just for a second. He tried to recover, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. His hands tightened around the edge of the folder as he stood at the head of the table. Thank you for reconvening, he began, launching into his rehearsed opening. As promised, I've brought the full documentation for Quantum Link's back-end logic and architecture. I believe this will clarify any outstanding questions. He began handing out packets. They were the ones I had sent, the decoy. Page after page of vague, technical-sounding nonsense. Pretty charts with no real function. Placeholders labeled like modules, but missing core infrastructure logic. At first, the partners flipped through it casually. Then, the frowns began. Randall was the first to speak. I'm sorry, David, where is the recursive indexing path? The one you said handled real-time recalibration? David blinked. That's included in Section 4. The diagram on page 16 outlines the core loop logic. Randall turned the page, held it up. This? He asked flatly. This is a flowchart without data. It's labeled, but there's no actual algorithm, no variables, no code logic, just shapes. David hesitated. It's conceptual, for clarity. Eleanor Tate cut in sharply. You said this was implementation ready. What I'm seeing here wouldn't pass a first-year systems design review. Where are the performance metrics? Where's the code base summary? David was sweating now. The core code isn't included in print, for IP protection. So you're pitching a $50 million rollout without actual back-end logic? Randall asked, voice rising. You assured us you had this covered. David opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence crackled, and that's when I stood up. Without a word, I walked to the front of the room, past David slowly, and connected my USB drive to the boardroom screen. The projector flickered, and then, slide by slide, the real quantum link bloomed across the screen. My diagrams, my code logic, my architecture flowcharts, each one clean, annotated, irrefutable. I didn't say anything yet. I let them look. I let them see. Then I pulled up the final slide, a digital document with the original submission date and at the bottom, a clear signature, Emery L. Bennett. Lead Systems Architect gasps rippled down the table. David turned to me, his face pale, stunned. "This is sabotage," he hissed under his breath. "No," I said calmly. "This is the truth." Eleanor leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Miss Bennett, did you author this architecture?" "I did. Every line, every model, every benchmark." "And David?" "He had no involvement beyond reading the summaries I emailed. He hasn't written a single module. He didn't even know what language the arbitration layer was written in." The silence that followed was thick with humiliation. But not mine, David's. And for the first time, he didn't look like the confident executive. He looked like a man caught holding someone else's crown, just as it was being taken back. David was gone within 24 hours. The board didn't make a spectacle of it. Corporate rarely does. One moment, he was sending panicked follow-up emails, trying to spin the meeting into a miscommunication. And the next, his nameplate was removed from his door, and an HR rep was handing him a sealed envelope in a corner office no one would ever call his again. No press release. No thank you for your service. Just silence and erasure. Irony has a sense of timing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile when I saw him leaving the building, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. But I watched him go, not with triumph, but with clarity. Because the victory wasn't just that he got fired. It was that I stayed. I sat in that boardroom with the same people who'd once barely glanced in my direction, and now they leaned forward, asked questions, scribbled notes, nodded at every detail I explained. They wanted to know about my work, my process, my vision. It felt good, but it also felt heavy. Because as much as I wanted to believe this was the turning point, I knew better. The moment passed. The adrenaline faded, and I realized something sharp and unshakable. This wouldn't be the last time. There would be more rooms where someone would try to speak over me. More bosses who smiled too much and listened too little. More times when I'd have to prove, again, that I deserved to be there. But now I knew how. And more importantly, I knew that I could. I didn't just survive David's betrayal. I rewrote the story he tried to erase me from. In the weeks that followed, I was promoted, officially, to Director of Systems Architecture. My name was printed on the internal bulletin. The press release mentioned my leadership, my innovation. They even asked me to represent the company at an upcoming tech summit in San Francisco. But the most meaningful thing? Late one evening, as the office emptied, I opened the door to the conference room where it all fell apart, and where it all came back together. I stood in the center, letting the quiet settle. On the table, someone had left a single folder. Inside, it was the finalized Quantum Link implementation report, now rebranded under my name. And on the last page, in bold type, was one line, Primary author, Emery L. Bennett. I ran my fingers over the ink, and for the first time in months, I exhaled fully. I'd won. But I knew now that winning wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because women like me, builders, thinkers, quiet firebrands, we don't just fight for credit. We fight for the right to build without fear. And from that day forward, I promised myself, they could try to take the mic, the spotlight, the stage, but not the blueprint. Never again.